Vitals don't look good. Doctor, patient is 247 years old, has sustained over 1.5 million gunshot wounds. Injuries becoming more frequent. I've got to say, I don't have a lot of hope for this one. I just don't see them pulling through. We're losing them. Wake up. America, you need to wake up. We need to talk about the pew-pews. The way I had originally written this script's intro is, in the wake of recent events, I was inspired to write this video about the Second Amendment. However, recent events doesn't quite cover it, because it doesn't matter whether you're talking about the most prominent, newsworthy mass shootings that have happened lately in the US, notably Buffalo and Uvalde, or whether you're talking about just the other day when someone did something that you've never even heard of because it's not newsworthy enough. These mass shootings are still happening all over the country, and it ain't getting better. I've been wanting to cover this topic about America's favourite pastime. No, not overeating, the other one. Mainly because I feel like as much as people are talking about it and the solutions are obvious, it still isn't inspiring change in the world. Where's that be the change you want to be kind of attitude gone? I mean, I know Obama is no longer president, and we will talk about that a little bit later, but life these days doesn't have to be as hopeless as it really is. Speaking to that, let's find out exactly how bad. Firearms deaths are a fixture in American life. There were 1.5 million of them between 1968 and 2017. That's higher than the number of soldiers killed in every US conflict since the American War for Independence in 1775. In 2020 alone, more than 45,000 Americans died at the end of a barrel of a gun, whether by homicide or suicide, more than any other year on record. The figure represents a 25% increase from 5 years prior and a 43% increase from 2010. The US ratio of 120.5 firearms per 100 residents, up from 88 per 100 in 2011, far surpasses that of other countries around the world. This is not the time to go, "Yay America, #1. More recent data also suggests that gun ownership grew significantly over the last several years. One study, published by the Annals of Internal Medicine in February, found that 7.5 million US adults, just under 3% of the population, became first new gun owners between January 2019 and April 2021. This in turn exposed 11 million people to firearms in their homes, including 5 million children. About half of new gun owners in that time period were women, while 40% were either black or Hispanic. A separate study, published by the American Academy of Pediatrics in 2021, linked a rise in gun ownership during the pandemic to higher rates of gun injuries among and inflicted by children. This is not a normal state of affairs, people, or at least it really shouldn't be. And while mass shooting and gun murders generally garner more media attention, of the total 54%, about 24,300 deaths were suicides. A 2016 study published in the American Journal of Public Health found that there was a strong relationship between higher levels of gun ownership in a state and higher firearm suicide rates for both men and women. Advocates for stricter gun laws in the United States often cite this statistic when pushing lawmakers to devote more resources to mental health and fewer to easing gun restrictions. Which is kind of a false dichotomy, because why not both? It's because they don't really care. They're just trying to make it look like they care. If they actually bothered with mental health services, then they would be pushing for more mental health services, not just saying that that's what they want. And yes, you can still tighten gun restrictions whilst also caring about mental health issues. In 2020, 43% of the deaths, amounting to 19,384 people, were homicides, according to data from the CDC. The figure represents a 34% increase from 2019 and a 75% increase over the course of the previous decade. Nearly 53 people are killed each day by a firearm in the US, according to the data. The data also show that the vast majority of murders, 79%, were carried out with guns. While the country does not have a single definition for mass shootings, the FBI has, for over a decade, tracked active shooter incidents in which an individual actively engaged in killing or attempting to kill people in a populated area. According to the FBI, there were 345 active shooter incidents in the United States between 2000 to 2020, resulting in more than 1,024 deaths and 1,828 injuries. The deadliest such attack in Las Vegas in 2017 killed more than 50 people and left 500 wounded. The vast majority of mass shootings, however, leave fewer than 30 people dead. What that is to say is that there are lots of mass shootings that kill few people, but they still all add up to lives lost, and there is no way in hell that I am ever going to accept this as a good or healthy state of being. What is wrong here is, I think it's self-evident. Despite widespread and vocal public outrage, rightly so, often in the wake of gun violence, Americans' support for stricter gun laws in 2020 fell to the lowest level since 2014, according to polling by Gallup. Only 52% of Americans surveyed said they wanted stricter gun laws, while 35% said they should remain the same. 11% surveyed said laws should be made less strict. The issue is also one that is hyperpartisan and extremely divisive, falling largely along party lines. Democrats are nearly unanimous in their support for stricter gun laws, the same Gallup study noted, while nearly 91% in favour of stricter gun laws. But only 24% of Republicans, on the other hand, agreed with the same statement, along with 45% of independent voters. One of the things I've been wondering a lot lately is, why is it that conservatives, not politicians, but just average people who hold conservative beliefs, why are they like that? Why do they support policies and positions that actively work against their best interests? This is especially prominent when you have minority, marginalized people who believe in conservative rhetoric. It makes no sense to me at all. Those people in the survey kind of proved that point for me. Gun crimes, gun control is out of control. Yet there are a significant portion of Republican voters who don't mind this? I get the whole argument behind my freedoms to own a gun and everything, but surely the freedom to live unencumbered and unafraid of some rando shooting up you, your loved ones, or anybody else must outweigh that. It absolutely has to. In any reasonable, logical, sensible society. But if that wasn't enough to convince you, how about these 7 handy charts outlining America's gun culture? This one is the top 10 civilian gun-owning countries, estimated number of firearms per 100 residents. You can see the US is quite clearly at the top. Yemen, the next one below it, is just under half the amount of firearms per 100 residents than the US. How gun-related deaths break down, you can see that the largest portion of this is suicide. And while suicide, mental health, prevention, all of that stuff does need to be effectively worked on, not having guns available means that suicide attempts are far more frequently going to fail. And people who have attempted suicide and failed, many of them, most of them, regret doing it and never do it again. Those people who had access to guns can't say the same thing. And then, of course, you've got the homicides as well, which is a rather large, significant portion of these deaths as well. Obviously, homicide is never a good or reasonable thing to do. Restricting gun access to people who would be murderers, surely that falls into the category of position. An international comparison of gun-related killings as a percentage of all homicides. The 4 countries here, the US, the UK, Canada, and Australia, compared with each other in the same year, just to be completely and utterly fair. Again, the US is by far the leading outlier in very sad and shocking statistics. Worst mass shootings in the US since 1991. We are talking 30 years. This is not 1 or 2 isolated incidents. This is a full-on pattern that no one in power is seemingly willing to break. And what's really sad for me personally, just as having the sort of life experience that I do, is that the bottom of this list is Columbine, which is the first mass shooting in the US that I ever really heard of. All these other ones have had the same amount or more victims. The problem is clearly getting worse. How Americans feel about US gun laws. This particular graph shows data that is the average of all people, and you can see that it's not actually divided by party lines. If it was, then you would see massive differences between the conservative Republicans and the Democrats. But as it is now, about half the population wants gun laws to be more strict. That half really ought to be listened to. Especially when their position was highest at over 60%. This one shows states with assault weapons restrictions, and it is absolutely baffling to me why there are so few states with any restrictions at all on assault weapons. This one is gun rights groups have spent more than gun control groups in the most recent years. The gun rights groups are lobbying with their financial backing behind them, and they are winning the rhetoric battle. Not to mention buying the politicians and getting everything they want that way too. And speaking of the gun lobbies, you can't mention them without bringing up the NRA. In 2020, the NRA spent about $250 million, far more than all the country's gun control advocacy groups put together. But the NRA has a much larger membership than any of those groups and uses its funds for things such as gun ranges and educational programs. The NRA officially spends about $3 million per year to influence gun policy. However, that is only the recorded contributions to lawmakers, and considerable sums are spent elsewhere via PACs and independent contributions, funds which are difficult to track. Despite years of financial woes and internal strife, the National Rifle Association remains the most powerful gun lobby in the United States, with a substantial budget to influence members of Congress on gun policy. In January, the NRA filed for bankruptcy as part of a fraud case against some of its own senior staff. Even after the move, it vowed to continue confronting anti-Second Amendment activities, promoting firearms safety and training, and advancing public programs across the United States. That's a shocking quote. That's actually terrifying. Over the last several election cycles, it and other organizations have consistently spent more on pro-gun rights messaging than their rivals in the gun control lobby. A number of states have also gone as far as to largely eliminate restrictions on who can carry a gun. In June 2021, for example, Texas Governor Greg Abbott signed into law a permitless carry bill that allows the state's residents to carry handguns without a license or training. This is the Wild West gone mad. Similarly, on the 12th of April, Georgia became the 25th in the nation to eliminate the need for a permit to conceal or openly carry a firearm. The law means any citizen of that state has the right to carry a firearm without a license or a permit. The law was backed by the NRA, and leaders within the organization called the move a monumental moment for the Second Amendment. So here we have it, the crux of the entire conversation when it comes to guns, gun control, gun restrictions, gun access. It's that Second Amendment worship. Let's see what that actually says, shall we? A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. What that means is that, strangely enough, someone decided to categorize gun ownership as a right rather than a privilege. The NRA has been humping guns ever since they could start getting away with it. But wait a minute. These laws about permitless open carrying have nothing to do with well-regulated militia. The Second Amendment is not the thing that's being upheld. It's the thing that's being twisted to suit people's personal preferences and then just disregarded whenever there's an inconvenient couple of words in there. Now, I'm no American law expert, what with, being British and all, but I'm looking at this from an outsider's perspective, thinking, this is insanity. You have to wonder why the Second Amendment was created in the first place. And to that reason, I have found a few explanations. The first one was, of course, government tyranny. And this new fledgling nation that you had that was totally your own, and you didn't steal it from any natives at all. It was being controlled by the British, and you wanted some independence, and, well, I can't say I'm exactly happy with what you've done with it, but I can at least respect the notion that you didn't want to be ruled by someone else. You wanted to rule yourselves. And the British government was being very tyrannical at the time, so I kind of let you off there. The other reasons that I found, however, are nowhere near as wholesome or straightforward. Back in that time, of course, slavery was still very rampant, very massively a big hinge on the economy, the way that things were run in the US at the time, and gun ownership was used to enforce slavery. It's hard to have slaves rebelling and uprising when the threat of being shot is a very real and present threat. But from my position as a Brit, I would like to tell you that, well, this sort of thing is not just an American problem. Mass shootings have happened everywhere. The difference is in how other countries versus the US have handled the fallout. Britain, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, Norway all had a culture of gun ownership and all tightened restrictions anyway. Their violence statistics now diverge sharply from those of the US. The world over, mass shootings are frequently met with a common response. Officials impose new restrictions on gun ownership. Mass shootings become rarer. Homicides and suicides tend to decrease too. After a British gunman killed 16 people in 1987, the country banned semi-automatic weapons like those he had used. It did the same with most handguns after a 1996 school shooting. It now has one of the lowest gun-related death rates in the developed world. Which, yay for the UK, we managed to get something right. In Australia, a 1996 massacre prompted mandatory gun buybacks that saw, according to some estimates, as many as 1 million firearms melted into slag. The rate of mass shootings plummeted from once every 18 months to, so far, only one in the 26 years since. Canada also tightened gun laws after a 1989 mass shooting. So did Germany in 2002, New Zealand in 2019, and Norway last year. The answer here, I think, is very fucking obvious. But I'll explain why I think America hasn't gone for it the same way that the other countries have at the end of the video. Another problem, I think, with the Second Amendment, like worship that happens over in the US, is the fact that it's so far outdated. Like modern weaponry and weaponry at the time of the amendment's ratification back in 1791, the technology's disparity there is so far different. This is over 200 years of technological advancements that have been made. And yeah, including the capacity of death-killing machines to be more effective. Let's take a look at some other amendments in your constitution, shall we? Because there's a precedent here that really, really wants to be followed. The 18th Amendment, the one that established prohibition of alcohol in the United States, that was proposed by Congress in 1917 and ratified in 1919. This amendment was repealed by the 21st Amendment in 1933. It is so far the only amendment to have been repealed. And I'm not going to sit back and suggest, well, just write a new document. It'll be easy. It's not going to be easy, especially with the Supreme Court that you have at the moment being largely Republican leaning. But it's not impossible. I think the most recent shootings have at least outlined and proved one thing, though, especially with the outcries and the outrage that has come as the after effects of that, is that Buffalo, Uvalde, all the other ones that have happened since then that you just haven't heard about because they're not newsworthy enough, they have proved that the situation is beyond the point of enough is enough. Hello everyone. So literally as I am editing this video, yet another high-profile mass shooting has happened in the US. This one on the 4th of July happened in Highland Park in Chicago. The person who committed the mass shooting has a very intense history of social media posts depicting mass murder, suicide, and death involving guns. And while I do understand that some of this was done in the context of art and music and rap, not all of it was. A lot of this fetishized violence, and this person also had a history of making violent threats, including to his own parents, from the reports that I've seen. And while there were certainly a lot of red flags that should have been taken into account here, there were no red flag laws in place, which meant that this person was able to obtain this firearm in order to do this mass shooting legally. It's just unfathomable to me how this manages to keep happening, how the regulations are so feeble and ineffectual, how not enough is being done to counteract any of this. And of course, the reason for that is because right-wingers are bending over backwards to do anything to avoid blaming guns and gun access and everything in their power to shift the blame to the same old boring, trite rhetoric that we've heard so many times before. It's the violent video games, it's the rap music, it's the young people's disillusionment. Well, young people wouldn't be disillusioned if right-wingers weren't being such fucking fascists and ruining their country. But beyond that, again, they keep saying mental health and not then doing anything about it. The frequency with which this is happening is such an obvious indicator that this problem is so huge and not enough is being done about it, and not enough will be done about it, which is yeah, okay, it's might seem very apathetic or nihilistic to say that, but you try convincing me of anything otherwise and you'll fail, because I don't see a logical, reasonable change happening from the top down, which is what needs to happen. The people in power are either feeble or bought off by the NRA, and those things ensure that change won't happen. Back to the rest of the video. And all of this, wrapping themselves in the Constitution like the NRA likes to do and the Republicans like to do, quoting the Second Amendment and using that as a method to try and anesthetize the population to the severity of the situation. It's a grim, disgusting twisting of the words there, which, let's face it, probably shouldn't have been put there in the first place. That's a little better now, isn't it? So, what's to be done? You have a crisis of epidemic proportions. How do you stop that? You target the source. Like it or not, guns are the problem. As much as the Republicans would love to blame anything but the guns, I've seen so much Republican denialism since this last shooting, spree, just deflecting to anything and everything that's not firearms. Thoughts and prayers, mental health, doors. Apparently doors are now to blame. Oh, Senator Cruz. You take away doors, you take away potential exits, not just entrances. How do these people not only get in power, but also stay in power? This is beyond my understanding. And I'm living in a country that is literally actively working against my best interest as a trans person. But that's a different topic. And it's not like the Democrats are much better. They're so super afraid of Republican backlash that they end up doing nothing. Well, most of them anyway. I was rather inspired by Beto O'Rourke's pretty solid, calling out of, other politicians and lawmakers on this subject. And I think when it comes to the topic of guns, mass shootings, he's got the right idea. Similarly, I'm pretty sure a lot of people are familiar with the speech that Matthew McConaughey gave after the Uvalde shooting, and the best deflection, probably more accurate word for it, that the Republicans could come up with is, oh, but he was in movies where he shot guns. It's hard to even tell these days whether Republicans can actually tell the difference between reality and fiction. Are they saying that as a weak gotcha, or are they actually just too stupid to understand the difference? I'm not going to be totally hypocritical here. I'm going to put all my cards on the table right here and now and say that yes, shooting as a pastime can be fun. I've done it. There is a shooting range it's in this county, that it's a converted farm. You can go. You can do all kinds of different shooting activities. Sniper rifle, skeet shooting with a shotgun, paintball. Great fun. All of these highlight the fun of the activity whilst being super safe and reducing the lethality because of all the safety measures, and the people in control there are the ones in charge. But moreover, they are the owners of the guns. You don't need to actually own a gun to rent one from a shooting range to have fun with the activity of shooting. And having fun with the activity of shooting, for me, involves shooting at non-alive things, like targets and clay pigeons, and I guess I just don't have that instinct to murder in me, you know? Moreover, accidents are far less frequently going to happen under these sorts of controlled circumstances. My point here is that I'm not entirely against the activity of shooting guns for fun. However, when you do have a crisis, like the US has a crisis, well, it has many, but specifically we're talking about the gun control crisis, tighter gun restrictions are the most sensible answer? How is this not already being implemented? I've literally grown up since the age of about 14, 15, knowing that mass shootings are a fact of life over in that country. And that's utterly terrifying and bizarre. It's like, this isn't a war zone. Not that there should ever be war zones, but this should not be a norm. Getting down to more sort of nitty-gritty specifics here. Gun buybacks, red flag background checks, restrictions on magazine capacity and, semi-automatics, or of course, as something I forgot to mention earlier, increasing the age at which someone can purchase firearms. I believe that you have a backwards cuckoo country when someone can legally drive a car, can sign up for military service, can buy a massive, high capacity death machine, but can't even enjoy a beer or a glass of champagne at a wedding. I don't believe that 18-year-olds are responsible enough for that sort of thing. And I think given that the most recent high-profile shootings involved 18-year-olds as the shooters, not to mention the other ones that also had school children who are able to access this kind of weaponry. Just good idea. But any and all of these suggestions are just sensible, restrictions, sure, but in the interest of public safety, that definitely does take precedent, or at least it ought to. The things that have the real massive capacity to do lots of brutal damage in a very short space of time, no one needs those. Nobody needs those. If the Republican rhetoric was to be believed, just for a microsecond, you would have to still ask the question, what use for any firearms would a good, upstanding, moral Christian society have? Certainly one with armed citizens. Here's the real example of Democrats being less than proactive. Do you remember when Obama was president and the Republicans kept shooting their mouths off, figuratively, saying that Obama was going to take away all the guns, and then he had 8 years and didn't do that? There were a few minor tweaks around the edges to gun restriction practices and rules, but by and large, nothing happened. Obama didn't take away the guns, even though I think that he probably would have been right to do so. I don't know what the bigger problem is. I think the US might be stuck in some kind of weird sunk cost fallacy where, because they haven't done any action, any sort of actionable legal measures to restrict gun access to just like any old randoms for so long, that they think, well, there's no chance of doing it now because all of these disasters have happened, so we've got to find a different way. No. Like, American supremacy is a toxic nationalist, sorry, I meant to say patriotic mindset that blinds the conventional wisdom, whatever the hell that might be nowadays, to the actions of the other countries that I've already mentioned. Like, sensible reactions to lots and lots of gun crimes, lots and lots of mass shootings, is restricting access, and then it happens less. This is not a brand new phenomenon. It's been going on for over 20 years now, 30 years now, and we've seen results. Why America can't take its head out of its own ass and stop literally trying to fuck guns in the most unhealthy way possible. It's baffling, it's boggling, it's absolutely mind-boggling. Especially when the majority of the American people want tighter restrictions on gun access. I know it's not a particularly fun subject that I've covered here today, but I am going to leave links to videos that I feel really attack the heart of the issue, utilizing comedy in a way that's very clever, and when I say comedy, I do really mean satire, but dark humor. I feel I couldn't say anything better than the people in these videos, and sharing their sensible points cloaked in the palatable spoonful of sugar that is comedy just hits in such a way that I'm not clever enough to figure out a way to. So if you feel the need to do that, the information will be in the description box. But that's where I'm going to leave it right now. So I'll see you next time. Please be safe. Although, let's face it, that's getting harder and harder to do these days because the people at the top keep making all these crappy wrong decisions. Good night. Fucking shut up. Like, this is over 200... Fuck off. Obviously, homicide. Bad thing. So is slamming the fucking doors, you twats.